The Wyndham Championship wasn't just the final tournament of the PGA Tour's regular season. For several big-name players, it was a fight for survival. With only the top 70 players in the FedExCup standings advancing to the playoffs, Wyndham became the last opportunity for players on the bubble to save their seasons. And when the final numbers were calculated, several major names were left outside the playoff field. Some missed the cut. Others survived the weekend but simply couldn't earn enough points. But the result was the same. Their FedExCup seasons were over. Here is how each player's playoff dream came to an end. Number 7. Johnny Keefer. Let's start with Johnny Keefer. Coming into Wyndham, Keefer was one of the players staring directly at the FedExCup bubble. There was very little room for error. He needed a strong performance at Sedgefield to give himself a chance of moving into the top 70. But instead of getting the result he needed, Keefer's tournament ended before the weekend. He missed the cut, and that immediately removed his opportunity to collect the points necessary to make the playoffs. It's one of the cruelest parts of the FedExCup system. You can spend an entire season building toward one final opportunity, only for your postseason hopes to disappear after just 2 rounds. For Keefer, that was exactly what happened. Wyndham was his last chance. And when he missed the cut, his playoff dream was gone. Number 6. Mac Meissner. Mac Meissner entered Wyndham in an even more intriguing position. He was close enough to the bubble that a strong week could potentially change everything. But being close to the top 70 also meant there was almost no margin for mistakes. Meissner needed to produce. Instead, his tournament ended before he could make his final push. Missing the cut meant he couldn't collect the points required to climb into the playoff field. And suddenly, what had been a realistic postseason opportunity became a season-ending disappointment. For a player sitting around the FedExCup bubble, that's the nightmare scenario. You don't necessarily need to win, you just need to do enough. But Meissner couldn't get the job done at the one tournament where it mattered most. Number 5. Lucas Glover. Lucas Glover brings another interesting layer to this story. Because Glover isn't just another player fighting for FedExCup points. He's a former Wyndham Championship winner. He knows this golf course. He knows how to win here. And yet this time around, Wyndham wasn't a celebration, it was elimination. Glover needed a strong result to keep his playoff hopes alive. Instead, he missed the cut. That meant no weekend opportunity, no late surge, no chance to climb the standings. And because Wyndham was the final regular season event, there was nowhere else for Glover to turn. The former champion's season had officially reached its end. It's a reminder that past success at a tournament doesn't guarantee anything when the FedExCup standings are on the line. Number 4. Jason Day. Now we get to one of the biggest stories of the entire week. Jason Day. For Day, this wasn't simply about missing the FedExCup playoffs. It was about the end of an incredible streak. Day had made the FedExCup playoffs every year since his rookie season in 2008. 18 consecutive playoff appearances. But coming into Wyndham, Day was sitting outside the top 70 and needed a major performance to save his streak. Instead, he shot rounds of 71 and 73 and missed the cut. And just like that, one of the most remarkable postseason streaks in modern golf came to an end. For almost 2 decades, Day had managed to find his way into the FedExCup playoffs. Not this time. There would be no playoff appearance. No final push, no second chance. The 18-year streak was over. And considering everything Day has accomplished in his career, that makes his Wyndham exit one of the biggest stories of the entire playoff bubble. Number 3. Tony Finau. Tony Finau's situation was different, and that's important. Because Finau actually survived the cut, that meant his playoff hopes were still alive heading into the weekend. But making the cut wasn't the goal. Finau needed points. He needed to climb the FedExCup standings and get himself inside the top 70. Every position mattered, every birdie mattered, and every player ahead of him represented another obstacle. Finau had spent much of the season fighting to put himself in a better position, and Wyndham was his final opportunity. But surviving the cut wasn't enough to save his season. When the final FedExCup standings were settled, Finau remained outside the playoff field. So while he didn't suffer the same fate as players who missed the cut, the outcome was just as painful. His season was over, and the FedExCup playoffs would continue without him. Number 2. Keegan Bradley. Keegan Bradley is another player whose story shows why simply making the cut at Wyndham doesn't guarantee anything. Bradley survived the cut. That kept his playoff hopes alive. But he entered Wyndham dangerously close to the cutoff and needed to gain enough ground to secure a top 70 position. That meant the weekend became a race against the standings. Bradley wasn't simply competing against the players in his group. He was competing against everyone around the FedExCup bubble. One player making a birdie could change the projected standings. One bogey could move another player below the line. That's how brutal the final weekend can be. And despite making it through the cut, Bradley couldn't do enough to secure his place in the FedExCup Playoffs. His postseason streak came to an end. And just like Finau, he learned an important lesson about the FedEx Cup. Surviving Wyndham isn't the same as surviving the playoff bubble. Number 1. Brooks Koepka. And then there's Brooks Koepka. This is the name that immediately jumps off the list. 5 major championships. 2 U.S. Open titles. 3 PGA championships. One of the most intimidating competitors of his generation. But entering Wyndham, Koepka found himself in an uncomfortable position. He was around number 86 in the FedEx Cup standings. And that meant he needed something special. A normal solid finish wasn't going to be enough. He needed a huge points haul to make the top 70. The PGA Tour's playoff scenarios showed just how difficult the task was. Koepka essentially needed a finish around the top 4 to give himself a realistic chance. And to his credit, he survived the cut. That meant the door was still open. But now came the difficult part. He needed to keep climbing. He needed to pass player after player, and he needed the players ahead of him to give him an opening. Ultimately, it wasn't enough. Koepka failed to make the top 70, and one of the biggest names in golf was left out of the FedExCup Playoffs. For Koepka, that has to sting. This is a player who has built his reputation around performing when the pressure is highest. But this time, the pressure of the FedExCup bubble proved impossible to overcome. And Koepka himself summed up the disappointment in brutal fashion, describing missing the playoffs as pretty pathetic. 7 names, 1 brutal cutoff. So there you have it, Johnny Keefer, Mac Meissner, Lucas Glover, Jason Day, Tony Finau, Keegan Bradley, and Brooks Koepka. 7 players, 7 different stories, but ultimately, the same result. Their FedEx Cup playoff dreams are over. Some never made it to the weekend. Others survived the cut but couldn't climb high enough. And then there is Jason Day, whose 18-year playoff streak has finally been broken. Meanwhile, Koepka's absence might be the most surprising of all. Because this is what makes the FedEx Cup so ruthless. It doesn't care about major championships. It doesn't care about reputation. It doesn't care how many times you've made the playoffs before. When the regular season ends, there is one number that matters, 70. If you're inside it, you move on. If you're outside it, your season is finished. And for these 7 players, Wyndham was where that dream finally ended. Which of these names surprised you the most? Was it Brooks Koepka, Jason Day and his 18-year streak, or Tony Finau and Keegan Bradley, who survived the cut but still couldn't save their playoff seasons? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoy the biggest PGA Tour stories, controversies, and FedEx Cup drama, make sure you subscribe, because now the playoffs begin.